Have you ever wondered if you could survive if you went back to the brutal slavery of the Middle Ages? You're thinking, how bad could it be? You like rustic cottages, fresh air, and the idea of living off the land. But the second your bare feet hit the mud outside your hut, reality slaps you with the smell of manure, the distant scream of someone being fined for sneezing on the wrong priest, and the dull ache of chronic back pain from a lifetime of forced labor. You might not survive. This isn't the glamorous Game of Thrones kind of medieval life. This is the real deal. You were born a serf, and that means you're not quite free, not quite a slave, but definitely not allowed to leave. You're property now. You belong to a manor, and by extension, to a man, your lord. He doesn't know your name, but he sure knows how much grain your family owes him this season. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you somewhere cozy or somewhere chaotic? Now find a comfortable place to lie down, turn on a small fan, relax, and let's start our journey tonight. You wake up on a dirt floor, your breath frosting in the morning air. Your bed is straw, your blanket is whatever animal skin survived the winter, and your pillow is a sack of barley. Congratulations, you're in the feudal system now, medieval Europe's most beautifully inefficient version of social hierarchy. There's a king somewhere up there, but what matters to you is the man on the horse who controls your village, the lord of the manor. You're a serf, which is sort of like being an unpaid intern, but with more plowing and less hope. You're not allowed to move away, get married, or even sell your own cow without his permission. If you die, your children inherit your debt. If they die, your grandchildren do. Honestly, you'd have better luck being born a goat. At least goats can wander. You trudge outside to start your day. The rooster crowed an hour ago, but you ignored it partly because you hate that bird, and partly because you're already late. Fields don't plow themselves, and your quota isn't going to meet itself. Half of everything you harvest goes to the Lord. A chunk goes to the church. What's left enough to keep you alive, and just miserable enough not to rebel. You pass other villagers as you walk. Old Tom has been up since dark. He's 34 and looks 70. His wife is pregnant with their 7th child. The first 3 died of something. Historians still debate. Possibly bad water, possibly just being born in the 1200s. You notice something today. A new iron fence around the manor's grain store. Last week, someone stole a loaf. Today, your lord responds with iron. You respond with silence. Complaining too loudly gets you flogged or fined, whichever's cheaper, for the bailiff. You get to the fields. The plow is older than your grandfather. The ox is barely moving. You whistle to motivate it, but honestly, you could use a whistle for yourself too. Your hands are blistered, your knees hurt. Your soul occasionally floats above your body and wonders what it did in a past life to deserve this. And just when you think it can't get worse, it rains. There's no such thing as rain delay in medieval serfdom. You keep working because if your crop yield dips, the Lord thinks you're hiding grain. That happened to Marta's family last winter. Now they live in a hole behind the smithy. You return home, soaked, covered in mud, and greeted by your mother, who is sewing your shirt back together for the 6th time this year. She offers you a bowl of watery stew with something that might be a carrot. You pretend it's delicious. You tell her you saw a bird. She smiles. Your younger brother comes in late. He's covered in bruises, got into a scuffle with the steward's son. He'll be fined tomorrow for insubordination, and maybe for bleeding on the manor's grass. You scrape together coins from your hidden stash. It's not enough, but it might buy forgiveness, or at least delay punishment. Later that night, you're in bed again, staring at the ceiling beams and listening to rats scurry above. You imagine being free, owning land, maybe even reading a book. Then you laugh because the idea of reading is almost as funny as the idea of bathing in winter. You close your eyes and dream of a world where you're not just a walking dead with a spine. Weird but true fact. Some lords kept inventories of their serfs, listing them like cattle: name, age, physical ability, number of teeth. If you had more than 10, you were considered robust. Historical anchor. The feudal system spread aggressively across Europe after the fall of the Carolingian Empire, with lords consolidating power around the 10th century. By the 11th century, manorialism became the dominant economic model. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether serfdom was technically slavery, since serfs weren't usually bought and sold individually, but functionally life wasn't much freer. You didn't choose this life. In fact, you barely had time to cry before your first obligation was noted in the manor ledger. Born between a dung heap and a thatched wall, you were immediately assigned value not by your family, but by the lord who owns the land your umbilical cord touched. No one asked if you wanted to be a serf. No one explained the system. You were born into it like moss on a damp rock. And that moss, it probably has more freedom of movement than you. You are villain Nodus, a born serf. Your life begins with a baptism in a cold stone church. The priest fumbles your name, dips your head in freezing water, and says some words in Latin while your mother tries to keep you from crying too loudly. She's nervous, not because of the ritual, but because there's a grain count tomorrow and she can't afford to skip it. Even today, religion doesn't pause the system. God might forgive you, but your landlord won't. And here's the catch. The second you're baptized, you're counted. The steward adds your name to the book, your family groans, and somewhere a nobleman grins, because his workforce just got a little bigger. Childhood in this world isn't playful. There's no treehouse, no hide and seek. By age 4, you're learning how to pick nettles without getting stung and how to shovel pig dung without gagging. By age 7, you're watching the village smith sharpen tools you'll one day injure yourself with. By 9, you're probably herding someone else's livestock while imagining what bread with actual flour tastes like. Your parents do love you. They just don't have time to show it. Life is a race against debt, and affection is a luxury they can't afford. Your father's back has been bent since age 20. Your mother's hands are always chapped. Neither of them has seen more than 2 villages away, and yet they know exactly what happens. If the harvest fails, the Lord takes everything, including the family's dignity. You ask your father once if he ever dreamed of leaving. He laughs. And go where the next village. They have a different lord. Same boots, different stink. You might be born poor, but you're expected to die obedient. In fact, you don't even own your own body. If you die, your heirs can't bury you without paying a mortuary fee, essentially a final tax charged before you're even in the ground. Your inheritance: a worn-out pair of boots, 2 chickens, and a long list of unpaid obligations. Congratulations, kid. There's a story passed around the village about a boy who ran away to the city, made it big, became a freeman, owns a hat with a feather. Some say he joined the clergy. Others say he was eaten by wolves. But everyone agrees on one thing that's not your story. Because you're bound. You start helping your parents at the age of 6, pulling weeds, gathering firewood, avoiding eye contact with knights who visit the manor. You learn fast to kneel when the bailiff passes. Never complain, and never ever be the last one to church. By your teen years, you've seen childbirth death, disease exorcisms, a cow giving birth backwards, and once your uncle tried to eat moss during a famine. You learn early God might love you, but he sure isn't showing it this week. The thing is, you're not technically a slave. You're protected. That's the language they use. The Lord protects you in exchange for your loyalty and labor. It's like saying the fox protects the hen by keeping her in the coop. You dream of freedom sometimes. Maybe you'll become a monk. Maybe you'll join the army. Maybe you'll... No. You remember what happened to Lucian. He tried to flee, made it 12 miles before someone turned him in. His punishment, 3 days in the stocks, followed by a lovely public whipping and a return to his fields, bloody bitter and silent. Now you know better. Still, there's this strange flicker in you, this thing that might be called hope. It surfaces when you hear about the Charter of Liberties or the whispered promise of towns that grant freedom if you live there for a year and a day. But that's a long time, and most who try never make it past day 3. Here's something weird: in some places, serfs are counted by their toes. If you're healthy and all your digits are present, you're considered a good worker. Lose a finger. That's recorded as depreciation. It's capitalism with a dirt crust. Some monks write about your kind in ledgers, distant cold descriptions, like sturdy lad, calloused palms, partial blindness. You are reduced to traits just as a farmer would list the qualities of a mule. Historical anchor. By the 12th century, most serfs across Europe were locked into hereditary status. In many regions, a child born to serfs was automatically considered part of the estate's property. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether the hereditary nature of serfdom was enforced uniformly across regions. In places like northern Italy, there's evidence of limited upward mobility elsewhere. It was a lifetime sentence. Later that evening, you help your father bury the broken fence post by the grain shed. You work silently in the dusk. He says nothing, but before going inside, he places a hand on your shoulder. For him, that's a hug. You eat dinner quietly. Bread, a turnip, something that may have once been an onion. And then you go to sleep, your legs sore, and your thoughts swirling. You think maybe you'll grow up and escape. Maybe you'll learn to read. Maybe the world will change. Or maybe, like your father, you'll just survive. Rooster again. No alarm clock, no snooze button. Just that same screeching bird perched on the same slanted roof of your neighbor's cottage, reminding you that time waits for no serf. You roll off your straw bedding. Well, it's more like straw sprinkled over dirt and stretch. Your back cracks like old timber. It's not even sunrise and already the day feels heavy. You fumble for your boots. They're damp. They're always damp. You wonder if shoes ever dry in this climate, or if medieval footwear just comes with a built-in squish. Outside, the village is already groaning to life. You're expected in the fields by first light, or risk a fine. Or worse, a visit from the steward, who always manages to find a reason to charge you for something, even if it's just standing funny near the Lord's chicken coop. Today's workload tilling the Lord's land, not your land. You have your own plot, sure, but guess what? You're not allowed to work it until the Lord's fields are done. By the time you get around to your own crops, the sun's gone and your bones feel like soup. You hoist the wooden plow into the earth with 2 others, Marta and Oswin. None of you are talking. It's too early, too cold, and too familiar. The soil is stubborn, Just like the ox, which is more ribs than muscle at this point, the manor never sleeps, and neither do you. You're allowed breaks technically, but by break, they mean 30 seconds to cough into your sleeve and keep moving. Someone tries sitting down once. The steward calls it idleness and taxes him a loaf of bread. That man now eats weeds behind the stables. Around mid-morning, you pause to sip from your water skin. The water tastes like iron and regret. You catch sight of the manor house on the hill, timber-framed, stone-walled, smug-looking. It's not massive, but it towers over your village like a smug landlord that never blinks. From that house, the Lord sometimes rides out to inspect the work. He never gets off his horse, never says hello, just nods. At the steward mutters something about quotas, then gallops back to wherever feudal lords go to count other people's wheat. You think he doesn't even know my name. Your stomach growls. It's porridge day again. You mentally prepare for the lunch menu gruel with a hint of onion served in a bowl that's been passed down through 6 generations and probably started life as part of a bucket. The food is bland, yes, but you find ways to joke about it. You call it noble stew on good days. On bad days, you just eat and don't ask questions. You get through the day thinking about the rhythm of the manor. It's like a machine powered by exhausted humans. Some people weave, some people blacksmith, some dig trenches, some raise sheep. Everyone has a task, and nobody has a choice. The only one who's exempt, the Lord's idiot cousin, who rides around the village on a donkey, he insists, is a horse. Everyone calls him Sir Applesauce behind his back. You once saw him try to joust a scarecrow. Here's the strange part: in its own way, this manorial system works. Barely. But it does. The village survives. People get just enough food, just enough rest, and just enough fear to keep showing up. You talk to old Elric while taking a turn at the mill. He remembers the old days back before the steward enforced Sunday labor, back when serfs were allowed to keep chickens. His voice gets distant. We were freer when we had nothing to lose, he says. You nod, but honestly, you don't remember a time like that. You've always had something to lose. Your tiny garden, your brother's health. The last goat that hasn't mysteriously vanished into noble inventory. As evening falls, you finish dragging bundles of hay toward the barn. Your arms feel like firewood, brittle and splintered. The sun dips behind the trees, painting the sky orange and ash gray. It's beautiful if you can ignore the part where your hands are bleeding and your stomach is still half empty. You walk back toward your cottage, passing the communal oven where someone's burned the bread again. A thin line of smoke winds through the air, making your eyes sting. A group of children chase a rat for fun. One of them shouts, "Dinner," and everyone laughs like it's not partially true. You finally sit. Your feet throb. Your shirt smells like a fermented sock. But your family is safe. The roof only leaks a little, and no one got punished today. By medieval standards, that's basically Christmas. You close your eyes and try to remember what it was like to feel truly rested. You can't. Not really. Your body lives in this world, but your mind keeps drifting, imagining roads that lead somewhere new, somewhere freer. But those thoughts are dangerous. Best to sleep now. The rooster has plans for you in a few hours. Historical anchor, the manorial system, was the core structure of rural life in medieval Europe from the 9th to the 14th century, with peasants obligated to provide labor goods or payments to the lord in exchange for the right to live and work on the land. Weird fact. Some manor lords were legally entitled to collect a windfall tax if a tree fell naturally. The wood belonged to the lord, not the serf, whose roof it crushed, academic debate. Historians still debate whether the manorial system was more exploitative or mutually beneficial. Some argue it created social stability, while others call it disguised slavery. Bread. You think of it constantly. Thick, warm, crusty bread, soft on the inside, crackling on the outside. In your dreams, you're sitting at a long table, tearing it apart with clean hands. But then you wake up, and the dream turns back into reality. Your stomach is empty, and the Lord is hungry. Today is tax day again. You've already given the Lord your labor, your sweat, your barley, your eggs, your last turnip that looked like a screaming baby. And now it's time to give him your money too. Well, not money exactly, because serfs rarely have coins. No, you're paying in the only currency you know: grain, wool, firewood, and resentment. You gather your offerings in a rough cloth sack, wheat that took months to grow, and a hen's worth of eggs you were really hoping to keep. The hen herself stares at you with betrayal as you take her breakfast. The tax collector arrives in the village, like a particularly smug thundercloud. He's dressed in rough wool with a leather satchel, and he always smells faintly of spoiled cheese. No one likes him, not even the steward, but he has a talent for counting exactly what you hoped he'd overlook. One by one, you and the others line up like livestock. When your turn comes, he doesn't look at you, just your sack. "This feels light," he grunts. You fight the urge to say something sarcastic, like "so does your soul," but you smile instead. Talking back costs extra. You know this because Oswin once sneezed during a tithe, and it turned into a 3-week punishment, hauling stones to repair the Lord's garden path. The tax isn't just for the Lord. No, the church wants a piece too. Enter the tithe, 10% of your production, claimed by men in long robes who tell you it's for God. And you believe them most of the time. But it's hard to feel holy when your children go to bed chewing on boiled weeds. Then there's the fee for using the mill, which the Lord owns, of course. You can't grind your own grain without permission. Try it, and you'll be fined for stealing noble profit. Even the communal oven isn't free. Bake your bread, pay a fee. Burn it, pay again for smoke pollution. Today you hand over 1 sack of grain, 6 eggs, a handful of nuts you were hoping to eat later, a sad little smile that says, "Please don't notice I'm starving." The tax collector nods. "You're lucky it's a good season," he mutters. "Next year might be worse." You want to ask for whom. By midday, the village feels lighter, not in spirit, but in food. Your neighbors shuffle away from the manor like wrung-out sponges. Old Elric mutters a curse under his breath, something about the tooth tax, which may or may not be real. You believe him. This place would absolutely tax you per molar if they thought they could. And yet, no one rebels. Not really. Why? Because rebellion gets you crushed and quietly. You've heard the stories. Once a village refused to pay their tax. The bailiff locked their well. They lasted 3 days. So instead of rising up, you grumble softly and dream deeply. You tell jokes at night about the taxman's pants. You carve rude symbols into the back of the millstone. You do what every human in a cage does. You adapt. As evening settles, the smell of charred grain drifts through the village. Someone's burnt their bread again. You chew your own dinner, mostly onions, mostly sadness, and listen to your little brother ask questions about the tax system. "Why do we have to give so much?" he asks. You sigh, because the Lord says we must. But what if we said no? You pause. It's a dangerous question. You glance around. No one's nearby. Then the soldiers come, you whisper, and they take everything, even the cat. He laughs. You don't. That night, you lay awake, wondering where it all goes. The wheat, the wool, the chickens. You picture a long table in a castle, nobles feasting, laughing, drinking wine from goblets while their dogs eat better than you. And here's the final insult. Your tax rate isn't even consistent. It fluctuates with the seasons, the whims of the Lord, and the mood of whoever's holding the parchment. Sometimes it's 10%, sometimes 50%. Once during a famine, they still demanded tribute, and when you failed to meet it, they called you lazy. It's like being in a board game where the rules change mid-turn and the dice are made of bone. Historical anchor. In the High Middle Ages, manorial dues often included not just agricultural produce, but also labor service fees and one-time payments, like a heriot, a death tax. These demands could take up over half a serf's income. Weird fact. Some lords imposed bizarre taxes, like the marriage fine a fee to marry outside the manor, or the bachelor tax, literally punishing unmarried men for not producing more laborers. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether the manorial tax system was designed to sustain order or simply exploit the poor. Some argue it created a stable economic hierarchy. Others view it as legal extortion. You're 17 now, or maybe 18. No one really keeps track. There's no birthday cake, no candles. Just a vague sense of time, marked by bad harvests, and that one really early winter when your goat froze mid-bleat. Today is not about bread or taxes. Today, you want to get married, or at least you're thinking about it. There's a girl, Annika. She laughs like firewood crackling and can carry 2 pails of water without spilling a drop. You've walked past her 1,000 times, but this morning she smiled at you over a basket of wet laundry, and well, that was it. You're doomed. You muster the courage to speak to her father. He nods once, says, "You'll need the Lord's permission." Right, that again. Here's the catch of feudal love. You don't get to fall in love freely. Serfs must pay a mercheg, a marriage fee, to their lord if they want to tie the knot. It's not symbolic, it's literal. A real cost, often a chicken, a silver coin, or several days of extra labor. Can't pay. Then your love story becomes a dramatic tragedy with absolutely zero kissing. You approach the steward nervously. He writes your name down in a long scroll, then starts mumbling figures. Turns out Annika's family is from a neighboring manor. That means you'll need to pay double. Cross-manor marriages weaken workforces, he says flatly, like love is a competing economic system. You want to say, "I just want to hold her hand, man," but instead you nod and offer your prized possession a decent pair of woolen socks. He looks at them like they've insulted his ancestry. 2 days' labor as well, he says, and moves on. You're not surprised. This is the same steward who once fined a man for whistling too cheerfully during a funeral. You spend the next 2 days digging ditches for a drainage system the Lord will never finish, just so you can marry the girl who once helped you shoo a goose out of your cottage. Romantic, really. When the marriage finally happens, it's simple. A priest reads some Latin. You kneel in the dirt. Annika wears a garland made of weeds and hope. The village watches. There's no feast, just some extra bread from Marta's oven and a single jug of cider passed around like sacred wine. That night you share a straw bed and talk softly about what kind of children you'll raise, how many goats you might someday own, and what freedom might taste like. Spoiler, it probably tastes like something other than turnips. But even marriage doesn't set you free. If anything, it adds more chains. You're now responsible for producing more laborers, sorry children. Your children will be born into serfdom just like you. Their names will be added to the scroll. their hands expected to work their backs, expected to bend. Love doesn't lift the burden. It just helps carry it with someone else. And here's a little bonus if your spouse dies. Guess what? There's a widow's fine. The Lord collects from the survivor as though grief isn't enough. You learn fast that privacy is a myth. Your Lord owns your labor, your crops, and technically your bedroom. The church watches from above, and the steward watches from the bushes, probably taking notes. Still, somehow you're happy, at least when you forget the system for a minute and just focus on Annika's snort laugh when the goat gets stuck in the fence. Now here's a weird one. In some manners, lords had the right of the first night, the supposed ability to sleep with a serf's bride before the groom. Historians still debate whether this was ever really enforced or whether it was just medieval propaganda or a threat used to instill fear. Either way, the fact that it was even possible is enough to make your skin crawl. One night, you and Annika talk about escaping. Just for a moment. You lie in the grass and stare at the stars, pretending you're a freeman in the city. You could learn a trade, maybe cobbling, maybe brewing. She could weave. You'd have walls made of stone, not wattle and mud. No taxes, no stew made of roots and rainwater. Then a horn sounds in the distance. Someone's been caught stealing again. And just like that, the dream collapses. Still, marriage is something. A tiny light in the dark. A reason to keep going even when everything else feels like a never-ending debt spiral. You hold her hand and promise you'll build her a better life, even if it's just one chicken at a time. Historical anchor, the Merche marriage fine, was a common feudal tax levied on serfs for marrying, particularly if marrying outside their own manor. Lords feared losing valuable labor if women moved away. Weird fact, some manors even taxed pregnancy. If a serf's wife became pregnant before marriage, a fine was imposed, sometimes humorously called a belly fee. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether the infamous rite of the first night, jus primae noctis, was widely practiced, purely symbolic, or mostly fabricated by later writers and anti-feudal critics. You're walking barefoot again, this time to the chapel. Not because you're feeling particularly spiritual today, but because Annika heard that a wandering friar might be giving a sermon, and she insists it'll be good for the soul. You were hoping to sleep and maybe patch your tunic, or just lie still for 5 minutes without a beetle crawling into your armpit. But love means compromise, so off you go. You sit on a splintered bench inside the cold stone chapel, staring at a wooden crucifix and listening to a man in a brown robe talk about the sin of curiosity. He warns the villagers against asking too many questions, particularly about the stars, or whether rabbits have souls, or why the Lord owns everything but shares nothing. You feel personally targeted. When the sermon ends, you hang back, not because you're moved, but because you're hoping the friar has a book. Just one book. You've never read one, but you've heard the priest mention them. Holy books, law books, a bestiary with drawings of unicorns that might be badly drawn goats. You finally muster the courage to ask, "Can you teach me to read?" The friar blinks. He glances around, lowers his voice. Why, he asks. You shrug. Because I want to know more than turnips. He laughs. A kind laugh, actually. He tells you to bring him a small gift next week. Some herbs, maybe something to prove your sincerity. You nod, and just like that, you might have a secret education ahead of you. Here's the thing about serfdom no one likes to say out loud. Knowledge is dangerous. Not just because it makes you question your place, but because it might make you leave it. Most villagers can't read, and many don't care to. Not out of laziness, but because what's the point? A A serf with knowledge is like a snail with ambition, admired in theory, squashed in practice. But you're not like most. You start learning slowly. Letters carved into wood, sounds whispered behind barns. You practice tracing shapes in the dirt with a stick while pretending to feed chickens. You read the Latin words on gravestones and make up meanings for them. It becomes a game and then an obsession. Annika worries. What if someone finds out? You shrug. Then I'll be smart and beaten. The local priest catches you one day, staring too long at the psalter. You want to know what's in there, he asks, amused. It says, don't steal. That's the gist. You smile politely. He doesn't smile back. In this world, superstition fills the gaps that education leaves open. Your neighbors believe in saints and spirits, demons in the woods, and the idea that sneezing too close to a black cat can curse your wheat. You grew up hearing that if your right foot itched, you'd be called to the manor soon, and if your left eye twitched, a neighbor would die. When someone dies of illness, no one asks for a diagnosis. They blame a sin, a witch, or God's mysterious moods. A woman named Bruna once cured a fever with garlic tea. Now she lives in exile because people say her eyes are too green. You're surrounded by superstition, posing as knowledge and authority, posing as truth. That's why actual learning is risky. It's like lighting a candle in a room full of dry straw. It might show you the way out, or it might burn down your world. But still, you learn. Because once your mind opens, it refuses to close. You start to see the connections between things, why the steward always increases quotas after a feast at the manor, why certain families get punished more, why your village hasn't gotten a new plow in 10 years, but the Lord has a new hunting dog every spring. You even start wondering, what if the stars aren't just holes in the sky for angels to peek through? Here's a strange fact. You pick up monks in distant monasteries were inventing clocks with gears and weights and little bells to chime the hour. You've never even seen a sundial, but somewhere, someone is measuring time like it's a thing you can own. You tell Oswin this. He says, if I had a clock, I'd smash it and eat it. Maybe it tastes better than barley. Your secret education continues. You meet the friar at dusk behind the granary, and he teaches you slowly, quietly. Latin phrases, letters, ideas. He gives you a piece of parchment once, and you hide it under a stone by the stream. You check on it every day, like it's a holy relic. And then it happens. A rumor spreads. Someone in the village can read. People whisper. Fingers point. Suspicion lingers like smoke. You burn the parchment. Annika begs you to stop. You promise her you will. You lie, because knowledge once tasted is addictive. You're not just a serf anymore. You're someone who knows. And that is both a gift and a danger. Historical anchor. In medieval Europe, literacy was largely confined to the clergy and nobility. Most peasants were illiterate, and access to books, hand-copied manuscripts was nearly impossible for commoners. Weird fact, some people believed that reading or writing could summon spirits. A literate peasant might be accused of witchcraft or sorcery simply for knowing too much. Academic debate. Historians still debate how many serfs had access to informal education through religious figures or traveling friars, and whether this access contributed to later peasant revolts. You wake up to the sound of bells, low, slow, and deliberate. It isn't the market bell or the warning bell for a fire, it's the church bell, and today is Sunday. You pull on your least patched tunic, scrub your face with cold water, and prepare yourself mentally for the walk to Mass. It's not optional. Skipping Mass gets you reported fined, and depending on the mood of the priest, shamed in front of the entire village. You once saw old Brend get forced to kneel for 3 hours because he snored during the homily. The church is made of damp stone and smells like wet wood candle smoke and old incense. A single stained glass window filters light into a shaft that hits the altar at an angle so perfect you wonder if God angled it himself just to show off. The priest begins in Latin. You don't understand the words, most of the village doesn't, but you nod along anyway, trained by years of repetition. When he talks about sin, everyone looks suddenly interested. When he mentions charity, everyone looks at the floor. Then comes the sermon, and today's theme is especially cheerful. Suffering brings salvation. You shift in your seat. Your knees ache from kneeling on the cold stone. Annika fidgets beside you, her eyes glazed. The priest's voice echoes off the walls like a chant that's been repeated for generations. And in a way, it has. You listen not because it comforts you, but because this is the only narrative you've ever been allowed, that suffering makes you holy, that your hardship earns you heaven, that your hunger is actually a kind of gift. It's a neat trick. If you believe it, you don't fight back. And that's the role the church plays here, not just spiritual guide, but moral police, economic player, and sometimes even landlord. Many monasteries own serfs just like noble lords do. The abbey down the road collects taxes just like the steward. They don't call it tax, of course. They call it a tithe or a donation. But it feels the same when it empties your basket. After Mass, you walk past the church granary, which is full to bursting, even though half the village is chewing on boiled nettles. You wonder not for the first time how this makes sense. A neighbor whispers that the priest is fat because he's filled with the Holy Spirit. You consider suggesting that the Holy Spirit looks suspiciously like pie, but you hold your tongue. The last person who insulted the clergy was banned from confession for a year. That's the medieval version of being blocked. You still believe in God, or at least you want to. There's something comforting about the idea that someone is watching someone other than the steward with his tiny notebook and sour face. But you've started to realize something uncomfortable. The God you're being told about doesn't seem to like people like you very much. He demands obedience, silence, and endless work. You once had asked the friar quietly if God really wanted serfs to suffer. He said God wants justice, but sometimes justice takes centuries. You weren't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. Later that week, you attend a funeral. A child from the edge of the village. No one really knew her name. She died from something the healer called bad air, and everyone else blamed on a goat that walked counterclockwise during a thunderstorm. The priest charges the family a burial fee. You help dig the grave. You find yourself asking again silently why the road to heaven is paved with toll booths. You hear rumors that in distant places the church is splitting apart. Something about heresies or strange monks who say the Pope is corrupt. But those ideas don't reach your village, not yet. All you know is this: every time you hand over part of your harvest to a man in a robe, you feel less like a soul and more like an ATM with a prayer habit. But here's something strange. The church is also the only place where you can see art. The frescoes, the carvings, the stories painted on the wall. They show kings and angels, hellfire, and miracles. And somewhere between the stories, you feel a kind of yearning. Not for religion exactly, but for beauty, for meaning, for more. You notice a carving on a pew, someone's initials. You add yours beside it. Rebellion comes in small forms. One day, during a holiday mass, the priest says something that lingers in your bones. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You look around. You see dirt-stained hands, tired eyes, people who've never owned more than 3 spoons in their lives. And for a moment, you wonder if heaven might just be a story told to keep your fingers digging into the soil. Historical anchor, the medieval church played a dominant role in daily life, especially in rural areas. It collected tithes, influenced laws, and owned land, sometimes acting as both religious authority and feudal overlord. Weird fact, some clergy literally taxed purgatory families, paid priests to pray for dead relatives' souls to be released faster. It was called a chantry, basically a subscription plan for the afterlife. Academic debate. Historians still debate the balance between genuine spirituality and institutional control within the medieval church. Was it a stabilizing moral force or a self-serving power structure in robes? You hear the shouting before you see the crowd. A group has gathered in the center of the village, forming a loose circle around something or someone. You step closer, clutching your water pail, already knowing what this means. Another punishment, another lesson. You push through the crowd just in time to see a neighbor, Oswin, being dragged toward the stocks. His face is red, his tunic's been torn. The steward reads from a parchment, in a voice dripping with satisfaction, refusal to hand over 2 rabbits. Withholding the Lord's due, Oswin doesn't deny it. He just stares at the ground. You know the story. He trapped the rabbits to feed his sister, who's been coughing blood since Candlemas. But intent doesn't matter here. Law is shaped by the Lord, enforced by the steward, and translated by fear. They lock his head and hands in the stocks and leave him there. The village pretends to return to normal. You go back to your pail, but every hour or so someone sneaks him bread or water. One child throws a clod of dirt. Oswin flinches, but says nothing. By sunset, his eyes are swollen shut. Someone's scratched rabbit thief into the wood above his head. Welcome to justice medieval style. Punishment here isn't just about guilt. It's about control. It's about making sure you see the consequences. You don't just get fined, you get shamed. Publicly, thoroughly, creatively sometimes. One man was once forced to carry a sack of spoiled meat around his neck for a week because he tried to sell moldy cheese at the manor. Another was tied to a fence post with a sign that read liar because he overestimated his crop yield. The only thing worse than being punished is being forgotten while punished. You've seen people whipped, branded, and once chained to the church door during Mass so everyone could nod at them while singing hymns. And here's the chilling part. Most punishments aren't handed out by courts or juries. They're given by the steward or the Lord directly without appeal. You're not a citizen with rights. You're a labor unit with a face. Of course, there are actual crimes, theft, assault, even murder. But most of the time, punishment is about breaking rules you didn't know existed until you broke them. Step off the manor land without permission, fine. Use the wrong well, fine. Let your pig wander too close to the church, fine. In a stern lecture about demon-possessed swine. There's a saying whispered after dark, the Lord's mercy is long, but only because the rope is longer. You watch Oswin finally get released. He doesn't speak. He just limps home. You offer to help. He refuses, not out of pride, but because in this world, accepting help is its own kind of vulnerability. You wonder if the punishment will work. Will he stop trapping rabbits? Probably not. Hunger is more persuasive than fear. The next day, you see the stocks being scrubbed. Someone spilled something on them, maybe beer, maybe blood. A child uses the moment to poke his head through the holes and giggle. His mother yanks him away and smacks him. Don't get used to it, she says. Punishment isn't limited to lawbreakers. Sometimes it's just bad luck. If a wagon breaks while delivering grain, the driver might be blamed. If a storm ruins the Lord's fence, someone pays. If a chicken disappears, the bailiff investigates and ends up with a new chicken. Coincidence. You learn to keep your head down, to nod, to agree, to pretend ignorance, to never speak Latin in front of the priest unless you want to be accused of sorcery. And yes, accusations of sorcery happen. Once a woman named Linnet was accused because her garden grew too well. They tied her to a chair and dunked her in the stream. She survived. They called it proof of guilt. She left town. No one saw her again. There's no trial, just suspicion and whispers. You learn that being strange, clever, or different is as dangerous as stealing. Maybe more so, but there are ways to fight back. Quietly, you and a few others start carving small symbols into fences and barns. They're not quite letters, not quite signs, just marks. You leave one on the back of the stocks where Oswin sat. He sees it the next week, doesn't say anything, just nods once. Resistance becomes a language of scratches and glances. You help patch a neighbor's wall and say nothing when he offers you meat as thanks illegal barter. You take it, say a prayer, and bury the bones deep. Even your chickens learn to cluck quietly, because in a world where law is a weapon and justice is performance, the only defense is solidarity and silence. Historical anchor. In medieval manners, punishments were often administered publicly by stewards or lords without formal judicial process. The stocks, pillory whipping post, and public shaming were common disciplinary tools. Weird fact, in some villages, offenders had to wear a shame mask, a metal faceplate shaped like an animal or demon, while paraded around the market square. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether these punishments were more about enforcing morality or simply maintaining social hierarchy and obedience through fear. The rain has been falling for 3 days straight. Not the soft, poetic kind that makes the grass sigh, but the cold, slapping sheets of water that turn paths into trenches and roofs into sieves. You and Annika have resorted to sleeping with your feet in the chicken coop just to keep them dry. By midday, you're ankle-deep in mud, trying to coax a wheelbarrow full of wet firewood across a path that no longer exists. The wheels spin uselessly. You let go cursing under your breath. In the distance, perched dry and smug on the hill, is the Lord's manor house. That's the real punchline of your life, the man upstairs. You see him sometimes a blur of velvet and fur, riding past on a horse too clean for this earth. He wears hats, rings, belts that sparkle. His boots probably cost more than your house. You've never heard his voice directly, but you've heard the steward parrot it plenty. The Lord requires, the Lord commands. The Lord is displeased. You don't hate him exactly. You don't know him well enough to hate him. He's more of a weather system than a person, unpredictable, unreachable, and likely to ruin your crops and the manor house. It's a world apart, built of stone and wood with actual glass windows, glass and a tiled roof that doesn't leak. It has a pantry, multiple rooms, a private chapel, and possibly a wine cellar. You once heard it even has a bathtub. You laughed for a full 5 seconds, then realized it probably wasn't a joke. While your cottage smells like damp wool and goat breath, the manor is said to smell like cinnamon. You've never actually smelled cinnamon, but the word alone sounds luxurious, like something you'd name a pet you couldn't afford. And here's the thing, the Lord doesn't work. Not in the way you understand it. He hosts banquets. He rides. He occasionally signs documents with a wax seal. His job is owning things. Your job is keeping those things from collapsing. Today he's hosting a feast for visiting nobility. You know this because the steward's been barking orders all week. More bread, more beer, more flowers stolen from the priest's garden. You were assigned to gather firewood for the kitchen ovens, not because you're good at it, but because the steward likes yelling at someone who nods silently. You deliver your soaked pile of sticks to the manor kitchens and sneak a glance inside. Tables groan under piles of food pies, roasted meats, candied fruits, jugs of wine. You inhale the scent and immediately hate yourself for wanting it so badly. The cooks don't speak to you. You're invisible. But you hear them laugh about how the Lord once spat out a trout because it wasn't spirited enough. You wonder what spirited trout even tastes like. Meanwhile, your neighbors are eating bread that tastes like regret and sawdust. Some families mix bark into their flour during lean weeks. You've done it. It tastes like survival. And water. Let's not talk about water. You drink from the same well as your animals, hoping the frogs are a sign of life, not death. The Lord, on the other hand, has barrels of wine and occasionally imported ale. No one knows where it's imported from, but the word alone makes it magic. There's a new rumor going around. The Lord is raising taxes to pay for a new hunting pavilion. You don't know what a pavilion is, but it sounds suspiciously like something that isn't food medicine or shelter. Annika whispers that if the Lord sold one of his horses, he could feed the entire village for a year. You ask, and why would he want to do that? She doesn't answer. That night, as you curl beneath a damp blanket, you wonder what kind of man your Lord really is. Does he know how little you have? Does he care? Would it matter if he did? There's a chance he was born into this just like you were, a different side of the same crooked ladder. But while your rungs are made of splinters and rot, his are polished and gold-plated. You dream of his dining hall, of food you can't name, of salt, yes, salt, that miracle mineral that's so rare here, it might as well be unicorn dust. The manor has jars of it. You once saw a cook spill some on the floor and laugh. You cried a little inside. But here's the sharpest sting: you keep the manor alive. You build it, farm for it, feed it, clean after it. Your work builds the banquet, and you get the crumbs, if that. You're told it's natural, the divine order, the way things are meant to be. But as you fall asleep, you wonder who decided that. Historical anchor, medieval manor houses were often built with multiple rooms, private chapels, kitchens, and in wealthier estates, glass windows. Lords rarely interacted with their serfs and lived vastly more comfortable lives, supported entirely by peasant labor. Weird fact. Some medieval nobles used rose petals in their bathwater and scented gloves to avoid the odor of the commons. Academic debate. Historians still debate how aware the nobility were of serf conditions. Some argue ignorance. Others believe nobles deliberately distanced themselves to preserve power and guilt-free luxury. You're up before dawn again this time, not because of the rooster, but because of the cold. It's early spring and the frost hasn't quite let go. Your breath fogs as you pull on your boots still damp from yesterday, because of course they are, and step into a world made of mud, hunger, and obligation. It's time to farm like it's 1099. You walk to the field you've been assigned this week, about half an acre of patchy soil so dry it sounds hollow when you dig into it. The ox is already there, chewing grass like it's a full-time job. You and Oswin hook up the ancient plow, more rust than wood, and start your daily grind. The tools are terrible, the ox is slow, and the three-field system isn't helping much right now. You've left one field, Ello rotated another to barley, and this one wheat if it cooperates. It rarely does. The three-field system in theory is smart. 2/3 of your land is producing food, and 1/3 rests. But in practice, you don't own land, you work it. And this year, the manor added new quotas without improving tools, which means more output, same back pain. By midday, your hands are blistered. The plow handle has a splinter the size of a toothpick lodged in your palm. You chew it out with your teeth because stopping would cost you another hour. You wish you had iron tools or even a second ox. But those are luxuries for freemen or monasteries. You make do with what's available, rope-stubborn animals, and a sense of duty so deeply embedded it might as well be genetic. You remember when your grandfather taught you to read the sky not for signs from God, but for signs of weather. If the clouds move like sheep, he said, plant early. You've started noticing a pattern the clouds lie. This year, the rains came late, and then all at once, the frost lingered, the pests arrived early. You've seen more worms than wheat, but the quotas won't change. The Lord won't say, gosh, sorry, you had a rough harvest. Let's skip your tax this year. No, he'll say, where's the rest? You pause for a drink. Your water skin is filled from the shared stream, brownish with the occasional leaf. You try not to think about the goat who bathes upstream. Annika brings you bread for lunch, flat dry, made with barley and wild herbs. No butter, no salt. You pretend it's delicious. She gives you a quick kiss and says only 3 more weeks of planting. You try to smile. Across the field, the reeve is watching. He's a peasant like you, but appointed to enforce manor rules, a middleman who gets a slightly better cottage in exchange for ensuring everyone else suffers equally. You wave. He doesn't wave back. You've thought about rebellion. Everyone has. But the truth is, most people are too tired to even consider it. The only thing that revolts around here is the cheese. Some try to escape in smaller ways. You know a man who buried a second harvest of onions and only declared the first. Risky, yes, but now his family has enough stew to survive. You helped him cover the hole and said nothing, because in this system, survival is resistance. By late afternoon, you're exhausted. The ox is wheezing. The plow is jammed with rocks. You cut your hand on a thorn bush while clearing weeds and mutter a curse so quiet, even the birds can't hear it. You take a moment to look around rows of peasants bent over in the dirt like punctuation marks in a sentence written by someone cruel. No one speaks, just the occasional grunt or clink of metal on stone. You think this can't last forever, but you also know that forever is measured in seasons here, not centuries. The system might collapse in 100 years. That's comforting if you're a time traveler. But you still have to finish planting before the next rain. That night you return home covered in filth, your back screaming, your fingers raw. Annika has a bowl of turnip broth waiting. It's hot. You eat in silence. You both smell terrible. You both feel worse. But there's a kind of rhythm to it, a dull, aching rhythm you've come to depend on. You wonder if there's something beautiful in the persistence, in showing up every day, breaking the earth with your hands just to keep someone else fed. Or maybe that's just what you tell yourself to stay sane. Historical anchor, the 3-field crop rotation system became widespread during the High Middle Ages, allowing one field to rest each season. While innovative, it still demanded intense labor from serfs who rarely had access to efficient tools. Weird fact, some medieval farming manuals advised using urine and ashes as fertilizer. One English manor even recorded a pea tax for using communal compost piles, academic debate. Historians still debate how much agricultural innovation was driven by peasants themselves versus imposed by manor lords. Some evidence suggests serfs developed highly localized techniques passed down orally across generations. You've been coughing for 3 days now. It started as a tickle in the back of your throat, easily ignored. Then came the aches, the chills, the relentless fatigue that makes the air feel heavier than your shovel. You keep working anyway. If you stop, someone else suffers. And if you miss your quotas, you all do. Then you hear the rumors. It started in the next village. Fever boils death in a day. They say the bodies are so many, they don't bury them one by one. They dig pits. They say it travels on breath, on touch in the air. That it's sent by God, or maybe the devil, or maybe just the wind. You feel the pit in your stomach widen, and then it comes here. The first to fall is Marta's boy. He's 9, strong as an ox, and always laughing. He stops laughing one morning. By nightfall, he's buried beneath a shallow mound of damp soil. Then 2 more, then 7, then 30. Your village goes quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, a terrified one. No music, no children playing. The well stands empty. People avoid the church. Even the steward hides in the manor, leaving parchments nailed to posts instead of giving orders in person. You try to stay calm, keep working the fields, keep washing your hands in ash and stream water. But people start to vanish, not just from life, but from record. One day, they're hoeing turnips. The next, their house is abandoned, doors shut, no explanation, no funeral. You sit by Annika's side every night now, watching for signs, fever shaking the black marks that give the disease its name. So far, you're both safe. But you live like animals now, wary hiding, sniffing the wind for death. You see something strange one morning, a wagon covered in tarps moving through the village. 2 men in masks like beaks unloading something into the pit near the chapel. You don't ask what, you already know. Welcome to the Black Death. You try to stay busy. Work is safer than thinking, but it's hard to ignore the changes. Suddenly the manor is quiet. No orders, no taxes, no reeve. The steward is gone. Rumor says he collapsed mid-sentence and died before hitting the floor. You pretend to mourn, but secretly you're relieved. There are fewer hands now, and more land than workers. For the first time in your life, something shifts. The field isn't just a prison anymore, it's leverage. Oswin says it out loud, what you've only dared to think. They need us now. He's right. With half the village gone, the Lord who finally showed his face, gaunt and ghost-like, has no one to plow his wheat, no one to grind his grain. The manor isn't producing. The kitchen is cold. He needs serfs more than ever. And you see something wild happen. Wages. Actual spoken wages. A visiting noble offers coin for laborers to come tend his estate. Real coin. Not bread. Not scraps. Gold. You've never touched gold before. Some go, some stay, but for the first time, choice appears. And the lords. They panic. They try to reimpose the old rules. No leaving the manor. No negotiating wages. No upward movement. But it's too late. The cracks have formed. In England, they say the king issued the Statute of Laborers, trying to freeze wages and keep workers from demanding more. Historians still debate whether it worked. You don't care. You've already made up your mind. You're not just a tool anymore. But even now, even with the system faltering, your fear remains. You've seen entire families gone, entire towns. Priests drop dead mid-sermon. Monks weep as they burn their own libraries. You wonder if this is divine punishment, or if it's just what happens when a system built on suffering runs out of bodies. One night, Annika whispers, "What if this is the end of everything?" You stare at the thatch ceiling. Then maybe that's not such a bad thing, because you've started to dream differently. Not of running away, but of staying and having a say, of choosing your work, your land, your life. Not freedom, exactly, but something close. And in a world where plague couldn't kill the rich, but it did kill their grip on power, maybe that's enough. Historical anchor, the Black Death, 1347 to 1351, decimated Europe's population, killing an estimated 32 to 60%, and drastically altered feudal society. Labor shortages gave peasants unexpected power, which some used to negotiate better conditions. Weird fact, in some towns, entire city councils and clergy were wiped out in days, leading to records being kept by illiterate survivors who drew pictures instead of words. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether the plague directly ended feudalism or merely accelerated a process already underway. Some argue it broke the serfdom system. Others say it simply reshaped it. You're standing at the edge of the forest with a satchel over your shoulder, heart pounding so loudly you're sure the trees can hear it. Behind you lies the manor, the fields, the Lord's house, the church bells. Ahead, nothing but trees, whispers, and the long road to maybe freedom. You've made your decision. You're going to run. It started with a simple question, asked quietly in the dark. What if we left? You and Annika lay on your straw bed, staring at the thatch roof, while the world outside crumbled. Fewer people meant fewer eyes. The steward was gone. The Lord was weak. The rules, well, they were starting to feel more like suggestions. Annika hesitated at first. What if we get caught? You shrugged. What if we don't? You've heard the stories. If a serf escapes and lives in a town for a year and a day, they're free. No lord, no quotas, no merchets or fines. Just life. Towns have guilds, markets, bakers. You've imagined it so often that your dreams smell like fresh bread and ink. But escape isn't just hard, it's treason. You leave at dawn, quietly. No goodbyes. You carry a little dried meat, a crude map scratched onto bark, and a copper ring Annika made from old spoon wire. She squeezes your hand and says, "We'll go as far as the river, then decide." Your feet hurt by midday. Your legs ache. The road is nothing like the neat lines drawn on old maps. It's mud brambles and paths that vanish into nothing. You move at night, sleep during the day, steal apples when you find them, drink from streams, avoid towns. You meet others on the road, some, like you, some worse. A runaway blacksmith with burn scars on his arms. A girl dressed as a boy. An old man who claims he was once a knight. None of you ask too many questions. The first rule of escape: trust slowly. Eventually, you reach a town. Real walls, real guards, but not the kind that chase you, the kind that ask if you can sew or carry sacks. They need workers. Everyone does now. The plague left holes. You lie. Say your name is Jacob, that you're from a village lost to fever. No one questions you. You're offered a bed in a hayloft and work unloading grain carts. The foreman grunts. You've got strong hands. You don't correct him. He pays in on coin. Not much, but more than you've ever seen. Annika finds work at a bakery. She comes home, smelling like yeast, and smiles. You sleep with a roof over your heads, and no lord to take a cut of your dreams. The weeks pass, and slowly something shifts in you. You walk without fear. You speak without asking permission. You buy a cloak, a second spoon. You choose where to go, when to rest, how to live. It feels unnatural at first, like wearing someone else's skin, but then it fits. You hear a traveler mention your old manor, says it's changed, that the new steward is even worse, that the manor is half empty and the fields are being left untended. You say nothing, just sip your ale and nod, but you can't quite relax. There's always the fear that someone will recognize you, that a bailiff will appear with a parchment and drag you back. Some towns honor those warrants, some don't. It's a gamble. You carry the fear with you like a second shadow. You and Annika discuss it once late at night. Should we move again, she asks. You shake your head. We've earned this. The best part, you're not alone. The town is full of people like you, runaway survivors, dreamers. You join a guild. Well, technically, you apprentice, but it's a start. You're learning to write your own name, to calculate numbers, to think. Your muscles still ache from years of plowing, but your mind, it's alive now. You read notices in the market square. You help draft inventory lists. You buy parchment. You draw for the first time in your life. You draw your old field, then you burn the drawing, because you're not a serf anymore. You're a person. Historical anchor. In many European cities, especially in England and France, runaway serfs could claim legal freedom after residing in a town for 1 year and 1 day, as outlined in local charters. Towns often protected these new workers due to desperate labor shortages post-Black Death. Weird fact, some towns had freedom bells that were rung for each year a runaway remained hidden, counting down the days until they became legally free. Academic debate. Historians debate how effective this year and a day rule was in practice. Some lords used spies to recapture fugitives. Others quietly let them go due to enforcement costs. It starts with a goat, specifically Oswin's goat, who's been acting strange, pacing in circles, bleeding at odd hours, staring a little too long at the moon. In any other year, people would have laughed it off. But not now. Not when crops are failing. Not when the river is flooding. Not when people are getting sick again. So naturally, the village decides witchcraft. You've heard this story before. Every peasant has. When the harvest withers, or a baby is born with one eye slightly off, someone has to take the blame. And it's never the lord who took too much grain, never the steward who miscounted rations. It's someone else, someone poor, a little odd, a little too clever. This time, it's Bruna. You remember Bruna. She's old, wears 5 layers of wool even in summer, has a garden that always seems too green. People ask her for herbs when they're desperate, then mutter about unclean spirits when they recover. She once claimed the stars could predict when cows would give birth. You liked her, but she's also perfect, a perfect scapegoat. It escalates fast. Someone's cow gives birth to a calf with 2 hooves on 1 leg. A child gets a rash. A thunderstorm ruins the barley. Suddenly, everyone remembers something: the time Bruna sneezed and the firewood caught flame. The time she touched a boy's head and he had nightmares. Someone shouts, "She cursed my brother's boots." Another, "She stares too long at chickens." And just like that, mob logic kicks in. You try to speak up. She's harmless, you say. She helped Annika when she was sick. But your voice is small, the crowd is loud, and fear is louder. They drag Bruna from her hut. Her hair's wild, her eyes blazing. She's barefoot. She doesn't plead. She knows it won't help. They bring her to the church square. The priest says prayers. The reeve announces her confession, which is suspiciously eloquent for a woman who mutters to herself about dandelions. You know it's a lie. Everyone does. But it's not about truth, it's about control. They tie her to a post and demand she repent. She says nothing. The village burns her garden. She watches it with a face like stone. Later that night, the wind changes direction. Rain falls. The cow with the rash gets better. People start smiling again. No one mentions Bruna, and that's how it works. You think it's over, just another senseless tragedy. But then it happens again. A traveler is found with strange coins. A boy with mismatched eyes. A midwife who knows too much about herbs. They're questioned, shamed, sometimes chased away. The line between superstition and violence is hair thin. People turn on each other for reasons as small as an odd smile or an ill-timed cough. And when something bad happens, disease, drought, a bad omen in the sky, it only gets worse. You start noticing that the most vulnerable are always first. Women, widows, outsiders, the educated, anyone who makes others feel stupid, uncomfortable, or small, and suddenly you're grateful you kept your Latin lessons secret. Even Annika grows cautious. She stops talking about the strange dreams she's had since childhood. You bury the carved trinket Bruna once gave you because you're learning something horrible. In a world where pain is common and justice is rare, fear becomes a currency, and fear always needs a target. But here's the strangest thing, you also see something else. Something unsettling, but important. It works. Not the curses, not the burnings, but the illusion of control. After every scapegoating, the village calms. People smile again, they rebuild, they sleep. It's not rational, it's not fair, it's not right. But in a life where everything feels out of your hands, pointing a finger at a neighbor feels like power. And that terrifies you more than the sickness ever did. Because if the wrong winter comes, if the goats start walking backwards, if someone needs a witch to blame again, it could be you. So you lower your head, you stay quiet, you teach Annika to do the same. You survive, but you lose something too. Historical anchor, accusations of witchcraft were common in medieval Europe, especially during times of famine, disease, or war. The church and local lords often supported or ignored these persecutions as a way to maintain order and redirect unrest. Weird fact, some villagers believed that witches could curse crops just by looking at them, or cause impotence by stepping on a man's shadow. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether these accusations were truly widespread in the Middle Ages or exaggerated later during the early modern witch hunts. Some argue that most witches were simply unusual women with herbal knowledge or social isolation. It starts with whispers. You're hauling sacks of grain, sweating, limping, half-starved, and you hear it. They're rising up. At first you think it's just old Elric talking nonsense again, but then the Oswin says the same thing. Then Annika hears it from a merchant passing through town. A real rebellion, not just muttering or broken tools left accidentally out in the rain. Actual revolt. Your skin tingles. You hear about it from travelers, peasants in the south, refusing to pay new taxes, refusing to bow. In one village, they locked the steward in a pig pen and wrote "No Lords" in ash on his forehead. In another, they burned the manor down, danced in its ruins, and elected a baker as mayor. The spark becomes fire. Soon you're hearing names. Wat Tyler, John Ball, peasants who say things out loud you've only whispered in the dark. When Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman, you repeat it to yourself like a prayer. It's dangerous, but it feels good. At first you stay out of it. You're not stupid. You've seen what happens when people rebel. But then the new poll tax arrives, the one that taxes your existence, not your property. Just being alive costs you now. The steward returned and refreshed, says it's the king's will. Annika's eyes darken. She says, if we don't stand up now, when will we? So you join them. It starts small. You and Oswin refuse to turn over your wheat. The steward sputters and threatens stocks. You don't move. He walks away. Then you gather at the edge of town, 15 of you, then 30, then nearly 100. Pitchforks, flails, kitchen knives, hammers. Not warriors, just angry people with nothing left to lose. You march. You march to the next town, and the next gathering others like storm clouds. When you pass the manor of a cruel lord, you set fire to his granary. Not for revenge, for visibility. You arrive in London days later, your feet bleeding. You're stunned. The city is massive stone towers, cobbled roads, more people than you've ever imagined. Some shout for joy, some weep, some stand in stunned silence. Then you see them, the king's men. Not the king himself, a boy really, but knights in steel ready and waiting. Their faces are hidden behind visors. Their hands grip swords the way you grip your shovel. What Tyler approaches to speak, he raises his hand, and then they kill him, just like that. A flash of steel, a cry, blood on the stones. The crowd screams. Some run, some fight. You freeze. The king steps forward, not yet a man, but wearing a crown like it's made of bone, and says, I will be your leader. For a moment you believe him. You return home with a sore heart and bruised ribs. Not everyone makes it back. Oswin doesn't. Annika saw him fall. She doesn't speak for 3 days. The rebellion dies, not with a roar, with a rollback. The lords regain power. The king issues pardons, then revokes them. The sheriffs return. Taxes are collected. Quotas reinstated. Those who led are hunted, tortured, and hanged. You keep your head down again. But here's what they can't undo: what you saw, what you felt. The world shifted, if only for a moment. You looked the system in the eye and didn't flinch. You saw your value, your voice, your power, and that cannot be unseen. Things are quieter now. People return to their fields. But something has changed. Lords walk a little slower. Stewards speak a little softer. You notice them watching their words, because they know now. You can rise. You did rise, and you might again. Historical anchor, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England, led by figures like Wat Tyler and John Ball, was one of the first major uprisings against feudal oppression. Sparked by unfair taxation labor laws and post-Black Death tensions, it was eventually suppressed, but not forgotten. Weird fact, during the revolt, peasants stormed the Tower of London and briefly took control. It was one of the rare times commoners physically occupied the heart of royal power. Academic debate. Historians debate whether the revolt truly failed. Some argue it set long-term precedents for peasant agency and pressure on the feudal system, even if the immediate results were violent suppression. It's been years since the uprising. The fields have grown back. The manor has been repaired. Life on the surface looks much the same. Mud paths, aching backs, and wheat that only grows if you beg it nicely. But something is different, and not just in the soil. The system doesn't feel as solid as it once did. There are cracks in the walls, not just in the manor's foundation, but in the very rules that held serfdom together for centuries. You feel it when the reeve no longer dares to hit anyone. You hear it when peasants speak to each other in a new tone, not as defeated workers, but as people who remember that once, not long ago, they said no and were heard. Your children don't bow to the steward. They stare straight ahead. They ask questions. Your eldest has learned to write. You've taught him the word freeman. You and Annika still live in the same cottage. The roof leaks less now thanks to a good harvest and a lenient steward too scared to push hard. But the most important difference, you're no longer bound to the land. You've signed a contract, yes, a real, actual contract on paper. It's a tenancy agreement. You pay rent now. No more forced labor, no Merchets, no Harriets, no corvée days. You're a tenant, not a serf. The land isn't yours, not technically, but your work belongs to you. Not everyone is free yet. In some corners of Europe, serfdom still clings on, especially in the East. But here, where plague revolt and decades of quiet resistance have done their work, the manor has loosened its grip. The Lord is still there, older, quieter. He doesn't ride through the village as much anymore. His sons live elsewhere. They say nobles are moving to cities, now trying to turn land into coin. Feudalism, it seems, doesn't pay like it used to. The church still takes its tithe, but even the priest seems less certain now. He preaches about mercy more than obedience. People nod, but no one kneels quite as deeply as they used to. You still work hard, you still sweat, but the weight on your shoulders feels lighter. You own your tools. You choose your hours. You can leave if you wish. You don't, not because you can't, but because you're building something here. Not just a roof or a crop, but a legacy. Your children grow up with shoes. They read, they write, they talk about apprenticeships, about towns, about dreams. One wants to be a brewer, another a scholar. You think let them, because this is the moment you never thought you'd reach, when the word serf starts to sound like a story, like something from the past, something that used to be true, but isn't anymore. And that's the real ending to this system, not a revolution, not a bloodbath, but a slow unraveling, not a scream, but a whisper. You sit on a fence post at dusk, watching your son lead the ox into the barn. The same barn your father once worked under, threat of flogging. Now it stands repaired and quiet, and yours. You exhale, it feels clean. You think about all the people who didn't make it here. Bruna, Oswin, Marta's boy, the countless others whose names aren't carved anywhere, but still deserve to be remembered. You think of the phrase that kept you moving through it all. Things were not always this way, and now you know, in your bones, they won't always stay this way either. Historical anchor. By the 15th century in Western Europe, particularly in England and France, serfdom began a long, uneven collapse. Economic shifts, population loss, labor demand, and social unrest all weakened the feudal grip, leading to the rise of tenant farming, wage labor, and early capitalism. Weird fact, some former lords began selling freedom charters to serfs, not out of generosity, but because it became more profitable to collect rent than manage forced labor. Academic debate. Historians argue about when serfdom truly ended. Some say the Black Death broke it. Others claim it faded gradually, and in places like Eastern Europe, persisted well into the 1800s. The end was not a single event, but a million quiet acts of resistance, adaptation, and survival. You made it. Through frostbitten mornings, crooked harvests, whispered prayers, and impossible odds, you walked the full length of a world stacked against you. You were born a serf, but you did not stay one, not just because the system crumbled, but because you learned quietly and steadily that you were more than the role you were given. And now here you are, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells like earth in a cottage, that leaks less on land, that finally calls you by name. The manor still stands, but it no longer owns you. The church still chants, but you understand the words now. And the fields, they still demand labor, but they no longer steal your dignity. with every swing of the scythe. Your story was not marked by grand victories or famous speeches. It was built on silent endurance, on friendships forged beside plowshares, on holding a loved one's hand while they whispered dreams of bread and freedom, on asking again and again, what if? You survived not because you were stronger than the system, but because you kept going long enough for the system to weaken first. So now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift toward rest, remember this. You are not what they called you. You are not bound by the past. You are the ending they never expected. And you, yes, you carried the seeds of something better all along. So close your eyes. Let the candle flicker out. Let the weight of centuries fall off your shoulders. You've earned your sleep and the quiet that comes with it. You are free now.